Millionaire CEO divorced black ex for being barren. She returns as his testicle surgeon with secret twins. You divorced me because I was barren. Her voice cracked like thunder, ricocheting off the cold walls of the operating room. The billionaire who once commanded boardrooms now trembled on the table, stripped of power, stripped of pride, staring into the eyes of the woman he had cast aside. She stood over him with a scalpel glinting like vengeance, every movement deliberate, every silence deafening. His mind spiraled. Was this surgery or retribution? Because what she carried in her heart, and hidden from the world, was far more dangerous than any blade. 2 children. His blood. His legacy denied. And now, as his life balanced on her hands, the only question left was brutal. Would she save him, or finish what he started the day he left her? Thank you for sticking around with me, my wonderful story family. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. The glass walls of Titan Towers shimmered against the morning sun, rising higher than every other skyscraper on the boulevard. Inside the top-floor office sat Dominic Kane, a man who had everything anyone could dream of. 42 years old, tall with sharp features, a commanding aura that could silence an entire boardroom. Dominic was the image of success. A billionaire CEO who controlled markets with the flick of his pen. But for all the grandeur that surrounded him, sleek suits tailored to perfection, a desk carved from rare Italian marble, an office overlooking the city he ruled, Dominic carried a silence that money could never drown. He leaned back in his leather chair, scrolling through his phone absent-mindedly. A message from the board about profits. Another from a politician asking for dinner. And then the one he hated most. Still no air? The shareholders' talk. He clenched his jaw, tossing the phone onto the desk. That word again. Air. Dominic had built his empire from nothing. He was the son of a factory worker and a seamstress, clawing his way from poverty into riches with sheer ambition. But in the high society where he now reigned, money wasn't enough. Legacy was currency. Children were proof of permanence. And Dominic had none. Not because he hadn't tried. Because years ago he had loved once. A woman he thought was his forever. A woman he had married, cherished, and then discarded when she couldn't give him what he thought he needed most. He buried the thought quickly, as he always did. He never said her name. He never allowed her face to linger too long in memory. But some mornings, like this one, the ghost of her laugh would sneak into his silence, and it would gnaw at him until his chest ached. Mr. Kane. His assistant, Marissa, peeked in, holding a file. The London investors are waiting for your call. Dominic waved her off. Tell them to wait. I need 5 minutes. Yes, sir. The door clicked shut again, leaving him in the hollow silence. He rubbed his temples, ignoring the pulsing ache at the side of his head. The headaches had started months ago. At first, he'd blamed stress. But they were coming more often now, deep, sharp pangs that made his vision blur for seconds at a time. He told no one. Not even Marissa, who managed his schedule like her own heartbeat. Not even his closest confidant, who was really just his lawyer. Dominic Kane didn't show weakness. Not in front of anyone. But as the throbbing intensified, he pressed a hand against his temple, teeth gritted. A bitter thought crossed his mind. Is this what it feels like to have everything and yet nothing? Later that evening, at a gala in the city's most prestigious hotel, Dominic played his role with perfection. The black tuxedo, the crisp smile, the handshake that commanded respect. People swarmed him, politicians, tycoons, women in glittering gowns, all eager to brush against his power. Dominic Kane, one senator said, raising a glass. The man of the hour. Your investments keep our city alive. Dominic smirked, clinking glasses, though the champagne burned bitter on his tongue. From the corner of his eye, he caught a small group of older men whispering, glancing his way. He didn't need to hear their words to know what they said. A king with no heir is just a man with money. The laughter around him roared louder than the music. Yet inside, Dominic heard nothing but that word again, barren. It wasn't him who carried that burden, he had told himself years ago. It was her. The woman who couldn't give him children. He had convinced himself he did what was necessary, that ending the marriage was his only path forward. So why, after all these years, did the decision still taste like poison? Around midnight, Dominic excused himself early. In the back of his limousine, the city lights blurred against the window. He pressed a hand to his chest. The headache was back, joined by a sharper pain lower, deeper, gnawing in ways he hadn't felt before. "Drive faster," he muttered to his chauffeur, sweat dampening his collar. When he stumbled into his penthouse, he went straight to the bathroom, splashing water on his face. The mirror stared back with the truth. Beneath the polished exterior, he looked tired. Lines carved deeper around his eyes, a grayness in his skin he couldn't ignore. He loosened his tie, gripping the marble sink. For the first time in years, Dominic Kane whispered aloud, though no one could hear him. "Something's wrong." This was only the beginning. His empire was solid, his power untouchable. But his body, the one thing he thought he controlled, was betraying him. And fate was about to place him in the hands of the one person he never thought he'd see again. The city hospital's night shift hummed with quiet urgency, machines beeping, nurses whispering, gurneys wheeling patients across polished floors. Somewhere amid the organized chaos, Dr. Amara Ellison pulled off her surgical gloves, exhaustion written in the slight slump of her shoulders. Tall, graceful, with skin like polished bronze and eyes that carried both resilience and pain, Amara was a woman who commanded any room she entered. Colleagues respected her brilliance, patients trusted her steady hands. In the white coat with her name stitched neatly on the chest, she looked untouchable. But beneath the calm exterior, Amara carried memories that still stung like fresh wounds. Once upon a time, she had been a wife. She had been in love with a man whose ambition burned brighter than the sun. She had built her world around him, believing that love was enough. Until love had not been enough. She walked through the hospital corridor, nodding at familiar faces. Everyone here saw her as Dr. Ellison, the surgeon who never faltered. None of them saw the nights she went home and sat in silence, staring at two small photographs framed on her dresser. Two children. Her children. Twins, born after the divorce. Conceived against every medical expectation, they were her miracle and her secret. The world believed she had no family, that she had buried herself in her career, choosing work over motherhood. Only a few close friends knew the truth, and they protected it fiercely. Amara had decided long ago she would never tell him. Not the man who had looked her in the eye and declared her unworthy because she couldn't give him a child. Not the man who had signed those divorce papers with cold precision while she broke silently inside. The past was dead. She had buried it. Or so she thought. That night, after a grueling double shift, Amara drove home to the quiet suburb where her modest two-story house stood, warm lights glowing from the inside. The moment she stepped through the door, she was no longer Dr. Ellison, renowned surgeon. She was just Mama. "Mom!" Two voices squealed from the living room, tiny feet pounding across hardwood floors. She dropped her bag just in time to catch them. One boy, one girl, both 8 years old, their curls bouncing as they clung to her legs. "Did you bring snacks?" the boy asked, grinning up with wide brown eyes. "And did you miss us?" the girl added, pressing her cheek against her mother's waist. Amara laughed softly, pulling them close. "I always miss you." She kissed their foreheads, her heart swelling with the kind of love that had once been denied to her. Dinner was already set, thanks to her friend Naomi, who often helped with the children when Amara's shifts ran long. The three of them sat together at the table, the twins chattering about school, art projects, and playground adventures. For Amara, these were the sacred hours, the moments where the world slowed, and the scars of her past didn't matter. But sometimes late at night, when the children were asleep, she would catch herself wondering, what if he knew? Would Dominic Kane, her ex-husband, have softened if he had seen their faces? Would he have believed in miracles? Or would his pride have destroyed them all the same? She shook the thought away. It didn't matter. He was gone from her life. Forever. The next morning, she was back at the hospital before sunrise, reviewing charts with the efficiency that made her one of the most sought-after surgeons in the city. Her colleagues admired her calm under pressure, unaware that beneath her steel composure was a heart that had been shattered and rebuilt piece by piece. Halfway through her rounds, her pager buzzed. A message from the chief surgeon. "Ellison. Emergency incoming. High-profile patient. File to follow." She frowned, adjusting her glasses as she strode to the surgical office. Emergency cases weren't unusual, but when the chief flagged a patient as high-profile, it usually meant the media would swarm, and discretion was paramount. She opened the file on her desk, flipping it open casually, then froze. Her breath caught. Her pulse stilled. The name on the file stared back at her in bold letters. Dominic Kane. The room seemed to tilt around her. Her hands, so steady in the operating room, trembled now. She pressed her palms flat on the desk, trying to ground herself. It couldn't be. But it was. The man who had once destroyed her with words sharper than any scalpel was now her patient. The past she had buried was clawing its way back, and fate had chosen her, the barren ex-wife, the woman he had discarded, to be the surgeon who held his future in her hands. The rain lashed against the wide glass windows of Titan Towers as Dominic sat slumped in his office chair. He had ignored the throbbing pain all morning, brushing it off with his usual stubbornness, until it struck like a hammer to his chest. His vision blurred, the world spun, and he collapsed forward against his desk. Marissa's scream echoed through the room as she rushed in. "Mr. Kane! Someone call an ambulance, now!" Within minutes, paramedics flooded the building, their urgent voices clashing with the frantic rhythm of Dominic's shallow breathing. They strapped him to a stretcher, wheeling him through his own lobby as employees watched in stunned silence. The titan of their world, the man who never faltered, looked suddenly small, fragile, human. For Dominic, the ride to the hospital was a haze of flashing red lights and muffled voices. He drifted in and out of consciousness, his mind clawing at the edges of memory. And in that fog, a voice whispered through his head, not Marissa's, not the paramedics'. A woman's laugh. A voice he hadn't heard in nearly a decade. Amara. At the hospital, Amara stood frozen in the surgical prep room, her heart thudding against her ribs. She reread the file again and again, as if the name would change. But it didn't. Dominic Kane. Male, 42. Severe complications. Immediate surgery required. Her hands clenched into fists. Of all the patients in this city, why him? Why now? She paced the room, her professional mask cracking at the edges. The rational part of her whispered, "You're a surgeon. He's just another patient. Do your job." But the wounded part, the part that still remembered the night he walked out and called her Barren, screamed, "He doesn't deserve your hands, your skills, your mercy." She pressed her forehead to the cool metal of the cabinet door, whispering to herself, "Focus, Amara. Focus." A knock at the door broke her trance. It was Dr. Lewis, the chief surgeon. "You're leading this one," he said firmly. "We don't have time to bring in anyone else, and Kane's people are demanding the best." "That's you." Amara's throat tightened. "Aye. No arguments," Dr. Lewis cut her off. "Lives don't wait for our feelings, Ellison. Suit up." He was gone before she could respond. In the waiting area outside the surgical ward, Marissa stood anxiously with Dominic's lawyer, both fielding frantic phone calls. Reporters were already circling, hungry for the story of a billionaire CEO struck down suddenly. Inside the sterile prep room, Amara slipped on her gloves, staring at her reflection in the glass. The mask hid most of her face, but not her eyes. And in them burned a storm, grief, fury, and something far more dangerous, the ache of unfinished love. She whispered a promise to herself, low and sharp. "You won't break me again." On the gurney, Dominic stirred as they wheeled him under the bright surgical lights. His blurred vision caught the faint outline of a figure leaning over him, masked, gloved, ready to cut him open. For a split second, through the haze of anesthesia, his heart stumbled. Something in her eyes. Familiar. Too familiar. Then the darkness swallowed him whole. And as the machines beeped steady in the operating theater, Amara stood at the threshold of her past and her future. The man who had broken her once was lying vulnerable under her hands. One wrong move, and everything could end. One steady hand, and everything could begin again. The choice wasn't about medicine anymore. It was about fate. The surgical theater was silent, save for the beeping of machines and the hushed commands of the nurses. The overhead lights blazed down, harsh and unforgiving, spotlighting the man stretched out on the table. Dominic Kane. His chest rose and fell steadily, his life suspended between anesthesia and fate. For everyone else in the room, he was just another patient, another life to save. But for Amara, standing at the head of the table with a scalpel in hand, he was the ghost of every wound she had ever carried. "Vitals stable," the anesthesiologist reported. "Scalpel," Amara said, her voice calm, too calm. The instrument was placed in her gloved hand, cold and weighty. She steadied her breathing, her training guiding her movements. Precision. Focus. Nothing else matters. But as the blade touched skin, memories flooded and uninvited. "You're barren, Amara. What kind of man am I if I stay with you?" The slam of the door. The silence that followed. Her tears staining the divorce papers she signed with shaking hands. Her grip faltered for a split second. "Doctor," a nurse whispered, noticing. Amara swallowed hard, regaining composure. "Continue." She couldn't let them see. She couldn't let him see. Not even unconscious, not even at his weakest. She moved methodically, her hands sure and steady, the years of training overriding the storm inside her chest. Every incision, every stitch was mechanical perfection, yet every glance at his face, a face still infuriatingly handsome even under sterile lights, twisted the knife of memory deeper. She wondered fleetingly if he dreamt. If beneath the anesthesia, his mind wandered back through the years. Did he remember her smile? Her laugh? The nights they lay in bed whispering about a future that would never come? Did he regret it? Or had she been nothing more than a failed chapter in his story of success? Her jaw tightened. This wasn't about her anymore. This was about her oath, her duty. But as the final sutures were tied and the surgery neared its end, a dangerous thought whispered through her. If he knew about the twins, would he look at me differently? She shook the thought away. She couldn't afford it. When the surgery was complete, Amara stepped back, peeling off her gloves. Her face betrayed nothing, but inside, her heart pounded. She had held his life in her hands and saved it. She could have faltered. She could have let the bitterness dictate her. But she hadn't, because she was stronger than the woman he had left behind. As the team wheeled Dominic out of the theater, Amara stood rooted for a moment, her chest heaving as if she had run a marathon. He's stable, the anesthesiologist said softly, almost as if to reassure her. She only nodded, unable to trust her voice. Later, in the quiet of her office, Amara sank into her chair, her hands trembling as she finally let the mask slip. She closed her eyes, whispering to herself, "You saved him. That's all. That's all." But her heart knew it wasn't all. It was only the beginning. The sterile white of the recovery room hummed with quiet machines. The steady beep, beep, beep of a heart monitor cut through the stillness, marking each fragile second of life. Dominic's eyelids fluttered. His throat was dry, his body heavy, every muscle stiff as if wrapped in lead. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. The ceiling above him was unfamiliar, the faint chemical scent of antiseptic harsh against his senses. Then the memories trickled in, the sharp pain, the ambulance, the flashes of light. He shifted slightly, groaning. His voice was hoarse, rough, but enough to make the nurse on duty glance up. "You're awake, Mr. Kane," she said gently, adjusting the foreline. "Take it slow." The surgery was successful. Surgery. Dominic blinked, confusion knitting his brows. Successful? He hadn't even realized it had gotten that serious. And then, like a shadow passing across his mind, he remembered something hazy. A pair of eyes above the surgical mask. Eyes he had known once, eyes that had seared themselves into him long ago. No. Impossible. Who operated? His voice cracked, but the question escaped before he could stop it. The nurse hesitated. Dr. Ellison. The name struck like lightning. Dominic froze, his heart stumbling into a painful rhythm. He pushed against the bed rails, trying to rise, though weakness pinned him down. "Ellison?" he rasped, disbelief mingling with dread. "Amara?" The nurse blinked. "Yes, sir. Dr. Amara Ellison." She was the lead surgeon. The air left his lungs in one heavy exhale. He sank back against the pillows, his chest rising and falling rapidly. Of all the surgeons in this city, no, in this entire state, it had been her. Amara. The woman he had loved. The woman he had destroyed. When Amara finally entered the room hours later, the world seemed to still. She wore her white coat like armor, her expression professional, unreadable. But Dominic saw it immediately, the faint flicker in her eyes when they landed on him. A storm she was trying to bury. For a long moment, silence swallowed the room. Dominic was the first to break it. His voice, still raw from anesthesia, carried a weight that wasn't just physical. "You." Amara didn't flinch. "Yes. Me." His eyes searched hers, desperate, stunned. "You saved me." She folded her arms, her voice even. "It's my job. You were just another patient." The words sliced sharper than any scalpel, but Dominic knew better. There was nothing just another about this. He could feel it in the way her jaw tightened, in the way she refused to step closer to his bed. "Amara," he whispered, her name falling from his lips like an old prayer. She stiffened. It had been years since she'd heard her name spoken in his voice, deep, commanding, but now trembling with something he wasn't used to, vulnerability. "Don't," she cut him off, her tone sharp. "Don't say my name like that. Not after what you did." Dominic swallowed hard, guilt rising like bile. He wanted to argue, to defend, to say he had done what was necessary. But lying in that bed, weak and stripped of pride, the excuses tasted bitter. His throat closed around the words. "I didn't know it would be you." Her eyes narrowed. "Neither did I. Life has a cruel sense of humor." The silence stretched. The machines beeped. The air grew heavier with everything unsaid. Dominic's chest tightened, not from pain this time, but from the unbearable weight of facing the woman he had left behind. Amara, he tried again, his voice softer now. Thank you. She turned her gaze to the chart in her hands, refusing to meet his eyes. Save your gratitude. You're alive. That's all that matters. But the way her fingers clenched around the clipboard betrayed her calm. For the first time in his life, Dominic Kane, billionaire, untouchable, powerful, felt truly powerless. Because the one person who had once held his heart now held nothing for him but silence. And that silence was louder than any accusation. The room was still, yet charged, like the seconds before a thunderstorm cracks the sky open. Dominic lay against the pillows, pale but alert now, watching Amara with an intensity that burned through every fragile breath. She stood by the foot of the bed, her posture rigid, her coat pristine. A fortress of composure. But the silence was killing him. Say something, Dominic finally burst out, his voice hoarse but desperate. Anything. Don't just stand there looking at me like you're a stranger? Amara's words cut sharp, slicing into the tension. That's what you wanted, isn't it? For me to disappear from your life? To mean nothing? Her voice trembled only at the edges, like glass about to crack. Dominic flinched. He hadn't expected her to come at him so directly. He forced himself upright, ignoring the stabbing pain in his abdomen. I never wanted you to mean nothing, he said, his tone raw. I thought that I was broken? Amara's voice rose, eyes glistening though no tears fell. That because I couldn't give you an heir, I wasn't worthy of your name, of your love. The air between them thickened, her words hitting harder than any physical blow. Dominic's lips parted, but no defense came. He remembered the night he had said it, the cruel words flung in anger, the demand for divorce papers signed on the cold marble counter. He had told himself then it was about legacy, about the Kane line surviving. But hearing it now, through her voice, aching, scarred, it sounded monstrous. Amara, he reached out weakly, but she didn't move. Her chin lifted, sharp as a blade. Don't you dare try to touch me now. Not after years of silence. The monitor beeped steadily, an ironic reminder that his heart still beat even as hers thundered in fury. I loved you, Amara said suddenly, her voice breaking despite herself. God help me, I loved you more than anyone I'd ever known. And you, her breath hitched. You threw me away like a defective object. Dominic's throat closed. His empire, his billions, his power, all useless here. Here, he was nothing more than a man who had broken the only woman who mattered. I was wrong, he whispered, the admission foreign on his tongue. I was so wrong. Amara scoffed, blinking rapidly to steady herself. Too late for that, Dominic. Some wounds don't heal with apologies. Her words landed like a verdict. But Dominic wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. Then why did you save me? He challenged, his voice cracking under both gratitude and pain. Why didn't you let me die on that table? It would have been easier for you, wouldn't it? For the first time, Amara faltered. Her mask slipped, just barely. Her eyes softened with something he recognized all too well, the remnants of love, buried deep under resentment. Because, she said, her voice low, I took an oath to save lives, even the ones who destroyed mine. Her words echoed in the room, a dagger laced with both honor and agony. Dominic swallowed, his chest tightening. He wanted to argue, to beg, to explain, but every excuse felt cheap in front of her truth. All he could do was watch her turn away, her shoulders trembling. As she reached the door, she paused. Her hand lingered on the handle, but she didn't look back. You'll recover, she said, her voice clipped. The procedure was a success. Physically, you'll be fine. But don't think for a second that makes us anything again. Her words were final, yet her hesitation betrayed her. Dominic stared at her back, his heart pounding, his voice breaking as he called out. Amara, please. Don't leave me like this. She froze. But she didn't turn around. And then, with a quiet click, the door shut behind her, leaving him drowning in silence once more. The hospital wing was quiet at night, the kind of silence that pressed in on the skin and made every breath sound louder than it should. Dominic lay awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling, his chest tight, not from the surgery, but from the weight of words he hadn't been able to shake. Broken. Defective. Thrown away. Amara's voice echoed in his head like a curse he had brought on himself. He turned on his side, wincing at the dull ache in his abdomen. His empire had always made him feel invincible. Every merger, every skyscraper with his name on it, every camera that worshipped his presence, it was proof that he was untouchable. But tonight, Lying in this sterile bed, tubes still running into his arm, he had never felt smaller. Worse, he had never felt more guilty. On the other side of the city, Amara sat in her apartment, her white coat hung neatly by the door. The quiet hum of her fridge filled the silence. She stared at a glass of wine she hadn't touched, her hands clenched in her lap. Her mind wasn't on her home, or her patients, or even the successful surgery that should have been her pride. No. Her thoughts were chained to the man lying in that hospital bed, the same man who had once called her Barren and signed her away like a failed contract. She had spent years learning to hate him, years convincing herself that what he did proved he never loved her. So why had it hurt so much to see him again? Why had her hands trembled as she stitched his body back together, as if she was sewing up something much deeper than flesh? Back at the hospital, Dominic reached for the notepad his assistant had left on the table. His handwriting was shaky, the letters uneven, but the words spilled out anyway. I shouldn't have left you. I was a coward. He stared at the line for a long time, then tore the page to shreds. He couldn't send it. Apologies weren't his language. Deals, power plays, control, that was who he was. Vulnerability had no place in the world he'd built. But for the first time, he wondered if that world was nothing more than a golden cage, and if Amara had been the only real thing he had ever had. He clenched his jaw. He couldn't let her know how much she still mattered. Not yet. Meanwhile, Amara closed her eyes, the wine untouched, her fingers clutching the hem of her sweater. She thought of the twins, her twins. His twins. The secret she had guarded like a fortress for nearly 8 years. She told herself again, as she always did, that he didn't deserve to know. That he had forfeited the right the moment he walked away. And yet, tonight, for the first time, a part of her questioned it. Would the children hate her one day for keeping him a stranger to them? Her heart ached. But she shook her head firmly. No. She couldn't let him back in. If he could discard her once, he could discard them too. She wouldn't risk it. The night stretched long, restless, filled with unspoken words and unshed tears on both sides. Two people lying in different rooms, cities apart, both whispering the same lie to themselves. I don't care anymore. But if that were true, why did it hurt so much? Morning light spilled through the glass walls of Dominic's hospital suite. It painted sharp golden stripes across the white sheets, highlighting the lines of fatigue etched into his face. His assistant, Evelyn, stood at the foot of the bed, her tablet glowing in her hands. Her usual efficient tone carried a slight edge this morning. Sir, the board is growing restless. They've noticed your absence and the rumors. She hesitated, then finally looked up. They're saying your condition might affect the future of the company. Dominic's jaw clenched. Rumors. The wolves were already circling, hungry for the first sign of weakness. They won't get blood, he snapped, though his voice was hoarse. Schedule a video call with the board. I'll speak to them myself. Evelyn shifted uncomfortably. But sir, the doctor said. The doctor doesn't run my empire. I do. His words cut, sharp and cold, but the cough that followed betrayed his fragility. Evelyn said nothing, though her eyes flicked toward the door, as if silently reminding him of who had cut into his flesh and saved him just days ago. The thought alone made his chest tighten. Amara. He forced the name out of his mind. Across the hospital, Amara walked briskly down the corridor, her heels clicking against polished tile. A pair of interns slowed as she passed, whispering, "That's her, the one who operated on Dominic King." The CEO? Yeah. Word is, he's not as untouchable as everyone thought. Amara's shoulders stiffened. She hated gossip, but what unsettled her more was the way their eyes lingered, not with professional respect, but with curiosity, like they sensed there was something more between her and the patient. She ducked into her office, shutting the door with more force than necessary. Why couldn't people just mind their own business? She leaned against the desk, rubbing her temples. Dominic was nothing more than another patient. That's all. That's all she wanted him to be. But the truth pressed like a stone in her chest. He wasn't. He never would be. Dominic's call with the board went worse than he'd expected. On the screen, faces filled the grid, some loyal, some sharks waiting for him to falter. Mr. King, one director said smoothly, we are, of course, concerned about your health. Investors don't respond well to uncertainty. They're nervous. Dominic straightened, ignoring the burning pain in his side. My health is not your concern. Profits are, and profits remain under my control. But if your condition is temporary, Dominic interrupted. His voice was iron, but sweat dampened the collar of his gown. When the call ended, he slumped back against the pillows, every nerve in his body screaming. For the first time in years, he felt the crushing weight of mortality. And beneath it, a single image burned in his mind, Amara's steady hands hovering over his broken body. The same hands he once rejected. He closed his eyes, fists clenched. He had no right to want her forgiveness. No right to want anything. That evening, Amara left the hospital late, exhaustion tugging at her bones. But as she walked through the dimly lit parking lot, a familiar voice called out, "Dr. Amara?" She froze. It was Evelyn, Dominic's assistant. The woman's professional composure seemed to falter for once, her expression almost pleading. "Please," Evelyn said quietly. "He listens to no one but you. He's pushing himself, trying to prove he's still invincible. But if he keeps this up," she broke off, swallowing hard. "I don't want to lose my boss. You may be the only one who can reach him." Amara's heart twisted. The last thing she wanted was to be dragged back into Dominic's orbit. But the raw desperation in Evelyn's eyes told her this wasn't about business. This was about survival. And despite everything, despite the bitterness that still burned in her chest, Amara couldn't ignore the truth. She still cared. Too much. As she drove home, the city lights blurring past her windshield, her thoughts battled each other. He doesn't deserve my help, but he's my patient. He doesn't deserve to know the truth, but he's their father. Her grip tightened on the wheel. The wall she had built for years was beginning to crack, and she hated it. Because the moment that wall fell, she knew everything she had fought to protect, her heart, her children, her peace, would be in danger again. And yet, deep inside, a voice whispered the most dangerous truth of all. Maybe she had never stopped loving him. The storm broke late that night. Rain pounded against the hospital windows, thunder rolling like war drums across the city. Inside his dimly lit suite, Dominic paced, restless, his stitches burning with each step. He hated weakness. Hated how every breath felt like a reminder of his own fragility. And most of all, he hated how her name haunted him in the silence. Amara. Her presence lingered in the room, even when she wasn't there. The faint trace of her perfume. The sound of her voice echoing in memory. The touch of her hands, steady, precise, saving his life when he least deserved it. It infuriated him. He pressed his palms against the glass window, watching lightning split the sky. He was Dominic King. Men bowed to him. Women begged for his attention. But the one woman he'd once claimed, she had slipped through his fingers. And now she stood taller than ever, untouchable. The rage twisted in his gut. The door opened without warning. Amara stepped in, her expression sharp, her coat still damp from the rain. She hadn't planned to come, but Evelyn's words kept gnawing at her, and now here she was, standing face to face with the ghost of her past. Their eyes collided. For a moment, silence filled the room, thick with unsaid things. Finally, Dominic's lips curled in a bitter smile. "Well," he drawled, his voice low and mocking, "to what do I owe the honor? Come to remind me of what I've lost." Amara's jaw tightened. "You shouldn't even be standing, Dominic. You're tearing open wounds you can't afford." "Wounds?" His laughter was hollow. "Funny. You seemed quite skilled at cutting me open yourself." Her chest burned at the barb, but she refused to flinch. "I cut to heal. Something you've never understood." He stepped closer, his shadow looming over her. His voice dropped, sharp as broken glass. "Tell me, Amara, do you enjoy this? Watching me weakened? Watching me crawl while you stand there with your head held high?" She didn't blink. "No, I don't enjoy watching a man destroy himself." "Liar." The word hit like a slap. Her eyes blazed. "You think everyone lies because you've built your empire on them. But not me, Dominic. I never lied to you. Not about what I could give, not about who I was." For a heartbeat, his composure cracked. Pain flickered across his features, raw, unguarded. But just as quickly, he masked it with a sneer. "And yet," he said slowly, "you gave me nothing." The words punched through her like a blade. She swallowed hard, her hands curling into fists at her sides. "Nothing," she whispered. "I gave you love. I gave you loyalty. I gave you a home. You threw it all away the moment I couldn't give you the one thing you thought mattered most." The thunder outside roared, echoing the fury between them. For a long moment, they stood locked in silence, their breaths heavy, the storm raging both outside and within. Finally, Amara's voice broke, low and trembling but fierce. "You want the truth, Dominic? Here it is. You may have money, power, everything men kill for. But you're the emptiest man I've ever known. And no empire will ever fill that void." Her words cut deep. Deeper than any surgeon's blade. And before he could reply, before the wall around his heart could shatter, she turned on her heel and walked out, the echo of her heels a final blow in the quiet room. Dominic stood frozen, his chest heaving. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of his choices pressing down on him. And though he would never admit it aloud, her words burned in him with terrifying clarity, because they were true. Morning sunlight spilled weakly through the hospital blinds, washing the sterile room in muted gold. Dominic hadn't slept. His mind replayed the night over and over, her words slicing deeper than any surgeon's scalpel. The emptiest man I've ever known. The phrase haunted him. When the door creaked open, his pulse betrayed him. His jaw tightened, his body stiffened, but inwardly something fluttered, relief, expectation, need. Amara stepped inside, not in her sleek coat this time, but in pale blue scrubs, her hair tied back neatly. Professional. Detached. Every inch the surgeon who'd vowed to keep her distance. Your vitals, she said flatly, setting her tablet down. You're not improving. In fact, you're pushing yourself too far. He smirked bitterly, though his heart thudded unevenly. Is that your medical opinion, or your personal one? Her eyes flicked up, sharp. Both. She moved closer, checking his chart. He caught the faint scent of lavender clinging to her. The closeness suffocated him, not because he didn't want it, but because he wanted it too much. Don't strain yourself, she muttered, adjusting his foreline. His hand shot out instinctively, catching her wrist. The warmth of her skin burned him. Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't pull away. For a moment, the world shrank, just the beeping monitor, the faint hum of machines, and the memory of 1,000 nights they'd once shared. Dominic's voice was low, hoarse, almost broken. Why are you really here, Amara? You could have passed me to any surgeon. Why you? Her throat tightened. The answer twisted inside her, heavy with secrets she couldn't yet reveal. Because I swore an oath, she whispered finally. And because someone has to save you from yourself. The door burst open suddenly. A nurse stepped in, flustered. Dr. Bennett, there's an emergency on the next floor. We need you immediately. But protocol requires a physician to remain with Mr. King at all times given his condition. You'll have to stay with him. Amara froze. Stay with him? The nurse nodded, already rushing off. At least until backup arrives. It shouldn't be long. Silence fell again. Her eyes darted to Dominic's. His lips curved in the faintest smirk. Well, he drawled, his voice dripping with irony, looks like fate enjoys a cruel sense of humor. Amara stood stiffly, arms crossed, refusing to look at him. Dominic reclined slowly, watching her, savoring the forced nearness. Every tick of the clock pressed them closer into a silence that vibrated with tension. And beneath it, unspoken truths coiled like serpents. Neither could escape. Neither dared to breathe too deeply. But both knew this was only the beginning. The room stretched with silence, broken only by the soft, mechanical beep of the monitor. Amara busied herself with a clipboard, eyes locked on numbers, as though the sterile black ink could shield her from the weight of the man lying in that bed. Dominic watched her with an intensity that made her pulse betray her. His voice cut into the silence, sharp yet careful. So tell me, doctor, he said, his mouth twisting into the kind of half-smile that used to melt boardrooms and win contracts. Do you treat all your patients with this much hostility? Or am I your special case? Her lips pressed into a thin line. You're not special. You're stubborn. There's a difference. The words snapped sharper than she intended. Regret flickered across her face, but she didn't retract them. Dominic chuckled, a sound that rumbled low in his chest, though it ended with a wince of pain. Stubborn maybe. But admit it, Amara. You wouldn't waste this much energy on me if you didn't still feel something. Her head whipped toward him, eyes flashing fire. Feel something? She repeated, her voice trembling with restrained fury. You mean after being tossed aside like I was disposable? After you humiliated me in front of your lawyers, Dominic, telling me I was worthless because I couldn't give you children. Her voice cracked on the last word. The air thickened. He swallowed hard, his smirk fading. Amara's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the clipboard. She wanted to storm out, to slam the door and leave him drowning in his own arrogance. But she couldn't. The nurse had made sure of that. Dominic shifted on the bed, his voice lower now, almost raw. I was wrong, he admitted. God, Amara, I know I was wrong. But back then, I didn't know how to be anything else but the man who wins, who builds, who conquers. He dragged a hand over his face, frustration spilling through every motion. And when life gave me something I couldn't fix with money or power, I lashed out at the one person who... He trailed off, his throat tightening. The one person who loved me anyway. Her chest tightened painfully, the memories crashing in like waves. Nights she had held him when no one else could see him break. Mornings she had prayed for his happiness even when hers was crumbling. She shook her head, forcing steel back into her tone. Regret doesn't erase scars, Dominic. And it doesn't rewrite history. A long pause stretched between them, filled with words unsaid. Finally, Dominic's gaze softened, the arrogance momentarily stripped away. You're right, he whispered. But maybe it could write the future. Amara's breath caught. For a moment, just a flicker, her eyes betrayed her, softening with an ache she had fought to bury. She quickly turned away, focusing on adjusting the four-line, her voice clipped. You should rest. But her hand lingered an extra second too long against his arm. And that single touch burned. Dominic closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to memorize the sensation. For the first time in years, he wasn't haunted by emptiness, he was haunted by her presence. And Amara, standing stiffly by his side, knew with every pounding beat of her heart that the walls she had built around herself were beginning to crack. Fate had forced them into the same room. But it was something deeper, something unspoken, that would keep them there long after. The night grew heavier. Rain tapped softly against the window, casting silver streaks of reflection across the room. The world outside moved on, oblivious to the storm raging between the two people trapped within four walls. Amara sat in the corner chair, arms crossed tightly across her chest, as though she could hold her own heart together with sheer force. She had insisted on staying, claiming it was for professional monitoring. But they both knew better. Dominic shifted against his pillow, wincing as a sharp ache knifed through his abdomen. His groan pulled her eyes to him instantly, her instinctive concern betraying her. You should lie still, she said, her voice softer than before, almost gentle. He caught it, the softness, and it made him smile, tired but genuine. That tone, I remember it. You used to sound like that when you'd wake me up for work, whispering in the mornings, so I wouldn't grumble. Her throat tightened. That was a lifetime ago. Maybe, he said, his gaze holding hers. But sometimes lifetimes circle back. Amara stood abruptly, restless energy coursing through her veins. She walked to the cabinet, shuffled through supplies she didn't need, then turned back sharply. You can't just say things like that, Dominic. You can't walk into my life again, she caught herself, her voice cracking under the weight of emotions she couldn't contain. And undo everything I've built. His eyes softened, his pride stripped away. I don't want to undo it. I want to understand. I want to know if there's even a piece of you that doesn't hate me. The silence that followed was brutal. Amara clenched her fists, every muscle tight with resistance. But her eyes betrayed her, they glistened, caught between fury and longing. He reached for her then, not boldly, not arrogantly, but with a trembling hand, unsure if she'd let him. Amara, he whispered, her name a confession. Her breath hitched. For one impossible, dangerous moment, she didn't pull away. Their fingers brushed, a fleeting touch that carried the weight of years, of love lost and wounds unhealed. She snatched her hand back as if burned, spinning away from him. You need sleep, she said, her voice brittle. That's all you need from me right now. But her trembling betrayed her. Dominic lay back, eyes fixed on her silhouette against the dim light. You're wrong, he murmured. Sleep is easy. It's you I can't live without. The words landed like a thunderclap in her chest. She froze, unable to breathe, unable to respond. The rain outside grew heavier, as if echoing the storm inside her. And in that room, between silence, pain, and memory, the line between past and present blurred. The forced proximity had done its work. They weren't just two people trapped in the same space. They were two broken hearts circling dangerously close to colliding again. The night dragged on in silence, the kind of silence that gnawed at bones. Dominic had finally drifted into a shallow, uneasy sleep, his chest rising and falling under the weight of fatigue. But Amara did not sleep. She sat by the window, staring at the blurred outlines of the city through the glass, her reflection staring back at her, a woman both hardened and broken. Her mind betrayed her, slipping backward into memories she had fought for years to bury. She could still see it, the night everything shattered. The boardroom had been lit harshly, sterile white lights burning down on her as she sat across from him. He hadn't called her to talk privately. No, Dominic had made his decision in front of an audience, his lawyers, his advisors, his world of men in suits who looked at her like she was a defective product being discarded. You can't give me what I need, he had said, voice cold, final, every word a blade. I need an heir, Amara. I need a legacy. And if you can't give it to me. Her ears had rung, her hands trembling in her lap, nails digging into her skin until they drew blood. Dominic, she had whispered, her voice breaking. I'm your wife. Not your factory. Not your tool. He had flinched, but only for a second before the mask of steel returned. This marriage is over. Those 4 words had hollowed her out. A sharp knock on the present pulled her back. She blinked and turned to find Dominic's eyes on her, half awake, weary. You're crying, he murmured, his voice heavy with sleep. Her hand flew to her cheek, and sure enough, the warmth of tears betrayed her. She stood quickly, defensively. It's nothing. Just the rain. But he didn't believe her. He pushed himself upright, wincing, his gaze searching her face as though seeing it for the first time. Tell me, he said, softer this time. Tell me what I never asked. Her heart thundered. She wanted to spit back venom, to remind him that he had forfeited his right to answers the night he discarded her. But her body betrayed her. Her lips parted, trembling with words that had waited years to be spoken. You broke me, Dominic, she whispered, her voice trembling but fierce. You didn't just divorce me. You made me believe I was worthless. You humiliated me in front of your world, and you left me with scars you'll never see. His face crumpled in quiet devastation, and for once, he didn't try to defend himself. I thought, he hesitated, struggling with his own pride. I thought you'd hate me so much you'd never look back. But now, I realize I never gave you a choice to stay. Amara's chest ached. She turned away, blinking hard against the tears, her eyes catching the photograph sticking halfway out of her medical notebook. A photo she carried always. A photo of 2 smiling faces, 2 small children, their bright eyes mirrors of the man lying in that bed. Her fingers hovered over the photo, her pulse racing. Not yet. Not tonight. But soon. Very soon. The next morning arrived wrapped in a haze of gray light. The storm had passed, but its residue lingered in the air, wet earth, damp streets, a heaviness that clung to everything it touched. Amara had barely slept. Her mind had replayed Dominic's face when she had finally confessed part of her truth, the pain of being discarded, the humiliation. He had not argued, not once, and that silence unnerved her more than anger ever could. She entered his room with fresh charts, her professional mask firmly in place. But Dominic's eyes followed her every move. You didn't answer me last night, he said, his voice hoarse. Amara paused. I answered enough. No, he pressed, his tone sharpened by a rare desperation. You told me how I broke you, but you didn't tell me what became of you after. You disappeared, Amara. One day you were my wife, and the next you were a ghost. Where did you go? Her breath caught. She gripped the clipboard tighter, her knuckles whitening. Where did you go? How could she tell him that she had gone into the shadows, carrying the unbearable weight of betrayal, and months later, the unbearable wonder of a secret miracle? She forced her face into neutrality. I rebuilt my life. Without you. That's all you need to know. But Dominic leaned forward, wincing at the pull in his side, unwilling to let it go. No, that's not enough. You're here in front of me now, not just as a doctor, but as the woman I lost. And there's something in your eyes you're not telling me. His gaze flickered to the corner of the table, where that photo, half hidden, dangerously close to sight, threatened to betray her. Amara's stomach twisted. She snatched the notebook quickly, shoving it into her bag. But Dominic had seen just enough. That wasn't just a medical chart, was it? His voice was careful, low, like a man stepping across thin ice. Her heart thundered. Drop it, Dominic. Amara, he whispered, almost broken now. What are you hiding from me? The air thickened between them, electric with tension. For the first time since she returned into his life, Amara felt cornered, not by his wealth, not by his arrogance, but by his earnestness. He wasn't demanding as a CEO, or condemning as the husband who left her. This time, he was pleading as a man who knew he had once destroyed something precious, and feared he was about to lose it all over again. Amara swallowed hard, her throat tight, her lips parted, and for a fleeting second, the truth balanced on her tongue. But then her phone buzzed. A soft chime, a familiar sound, one reserved only for 2 special contacts. She froze. Dominic noticed the way her entire body stiffened at the sound. Who was that? Her silence was louder than words. She turned abruptly, stuffing the phone back into her pocket. I said drop it. But her trembling voice betrayed her. And Dominic, sharp-eyed even in weakness, noticed. Amara, his voice cracked, filled with something raw. Are you trying to tell me there's someone else? She closed her eyes, pain tearing through her chest. Yes, there was someone else. 2, in fact. But not in the way he thought. She wanted to scream it. She wanted to hurl the truth at him. You were wrong. I wasn't Barren. I was carrying the proof of your love all along. But fear strangled her. Fear of what that truth would do. Fear of how he would twist it. Fear that his pride would destroy their children just as it had destroyed her. So instead, she turned, her voice steel wrapped around fragility. Focus on healing, Dominic. That's all that matters right now. And she walked out before the dam inside her could burst. But she didn't see the way Dominic clenched his fists when the door closed. He wasn't letting this go. Not this time. The hospital quieted into its afternoon lull. The halls were hushed, the beeping machines softer, the nurses moving like ghosts between rooms. Dominic's room, however, was anything but still. He sat propped against the pillows, every line of his face sharpened with restless thought. His body was recovering, but his mind refused to rest. Amara's words replayed endlessly, her half-answers, her silences, the way her phone had set her trembling. She was hiding something, and for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking like the CEO who demanded answers from subordinates. He was thinking like a man who had once held a woman in his arms and let her slip away. Later that evening, when Amara left for a quick consult, Dominic shifted carefully from the bed, ignoring the twinge in his healing body. He opened the drawer she often used for charts and notes. Inside, tucked beneath folders, was a piece of paper, creased from being folded and unfolded too many times. His hand trembled as he smoothed it out. It was a drawing. A child's drawing. 2 figures holding hands. A man in a suit. A woman in a white coat. Between them, 2 smaller figures, stick children smiling wide, with hearts floating above their heads. At the bottom, in shaky handwriting, "For Mommy. For Daddy." Dominic's breath left him in a rush. His eyes blurred, his chest tightened. He sank back into the chair, the paper trembling in his hands. Mommy. Daddy. Twins. His mind spun. Could it be possible? After all the tests, all the doctors, all the accusations he had thrown at Amara, could it be that she had carried life within her all along? His heart warred with disbelief and hope. If this was real, if those children were his, then everything he had done to her, every cruel word, every rejection, had been a knife to her heart as she bore the miracle he had denied her. Tears stung his eyes. For once, the invincible Dominic Caldwell was undone. The door opened. Amara stepped in, her eyes instantly narrowing when she saw what was in his hands. The color drained from her face. "Where did you get that?" Her voice cracked like glass. Dominic looked up at her, his voice low, choked. "You told me I destroyed you. Amara, you never told me I destroyed them too." Her chest heaved, panic flooding her veins. She reached for the drawing, but Dominic pulled it back, his eyes locked onto hers. "They're mine, aren't they?" His voice trembled between rage and desperate hope. "The twins, they're mine." Amara's lips parted, her throat dry. The truth pressed against her ribs, begging to be set free. But fear, years of fear, sealed her silence. She turned away, her hand over her mouth as tears threatened. Dominic's voice broke. "For years I thought I lost a wife. But I never knew I lost a family." The silence that followed was unbearable. The air thickened with grief, betrayal, and an aching love neither dared to name. Finally Amara whispered, her voice fragile as a thread. "You weren't ready to be their father." And with that, she slipped out of the room, leaving him shattered, clutching the drawing like it was the last proof of a life he might never claim. The night after Dominic discovered the drawing stretched endlessly. Sleep was foreign to him. He lay awake, the dim light from the city seeping through the blinds, staring at the paper he still held near. His thoughts tangled like barbed wire, hope, regret, anger, longing. 2 children. His children. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw them, their imagined faces, their laughter, the way they might run through a sunlit park. And then he saw Amara, alone, carrying their secret, protecting the lives he never knew existed. By morning, his face was drawn, his usual sharpness dulled by exhaustion. Yet something softer had taken root in his eyes, a yearning he hadn't let himself feel in years. When Amara entered his room, she carried her professional mask as usual. But her steps faltered when she saw him. He wasn't the iron-willed CEO now. He looked human, fragile. "Dominic, you need rest," she said quietly, reaching for his chart. He studied her, his voice hushed, stripped of pride. "Amara, why didn't you tell me?" Her hand stilled, clutching the pen too tightly. Silence stretched. Finally, she whispered, "Because you broke me once. I couldn't let you break them too." Dominic closed his eyes, the truth slicing deeper than any insult or accusation. He had been blind in his pride. In trying to protect his name, he had destroyed hers. But instead of lashing out, he did something she didn't expect. He nodded slowly, and for the first time, said the words he never had the courage to before. "I was wrong." Her breath caught. The admission was raw, jagged, and so utterly unDominic. For a moment, the weight of years seemed to lift, leaving only two people, broken, scarred, but still bound by something neither could name. The air shifted. She sat down at the edge of his bed, hesitant but no longer fleeing. For a while they spoke not as surgeon and patient, nor CEO and ex-wife, but simply as Amara and Dominic. He told her of his sleepless nights, his fear of legacy, the emptiness he thought she could never fill. She told him of her years alone, the laughter of children who healed her wounds, and the constant shadow of his absence. At one point, he gave a dry laugh, shaking his head. "Can you imagine it? Me, the man who built skyscrapers and toppled empires, undone by stick-figure drawings." Despite herself, Amara smiled faintly. "Maybe that's exactly what you needed." The smile lingered. Fragile. Real. And in that fragile moment, the distance between them, so wide, so bitter, felt just a little smaller. The bond wasn't rebuilt. Not yet. But for the first time in years, the pieces were being gathered. The following days unfolded like a cautious truce. Amara remained professional, her hands steady as she adjusted for lines, checked charts, and guided Dominic through recovery. Yet beneath that steady surface, something unspoken stirred, an undercurrent neither dared to name. Dominic noticed it in the smallest things. The way her brow furrowed when she read his vitals. The way she lingered by the window at the end of her shift, as if collecting herself before facing the world outside. The way her voice softened, barely perceptible, whenever she said his name. He found himself watching her, not as his surgeon, not even as the woman who had once been his wife, but as though he were rediscovering her all over again. One evening, she entered quietly, carrying something different. A thin leather-bound notebook. She set it on the table by his bed, not meeting his eyes. "What's that?" Dominic asked, curiosity breaking through his fatigue. "A sketchbook," she said simply. "It belongs to them." His chest tightened. Amara hesitated, then finally slid it toward him. "They're old enough to draw now. They like to capture the world." His fingers trembled slightly as he opened the cover. Page after page burst with color. Crayon suns, lopsided houses, stick figures holding hands. And then he saw it. A tall man in a suit, drawn with clumsy determination. Next to him, two smaller figures with bright smiles. Above them, in shaky letters, Dad. Dominic's breath hitched. His throat closed around a flood of words he couldn't form. For years he had been certain he would never hear that word attached to him. Never feel its weight. And yet here it was, scrawled in childish handwriting, offered without his knowledge, his permission, or his presence. "Amara," his voice cracked. He looked up at her with eyes that carried both wonder and unbearable regret. "They think of me?" Her lips trembled. She nodded once. "Every night. I told them, their father is someone worth drawing." Dominic pressed a hand over his mouth, his composure breaking in a way she had never seen. The proud, unyielding CEO was gone. What remained was a man undone by the smallest, purest truth. Amara moved closer, her own walls crumbling. For years, she had hated him for the wound he left behind. Yet here, seeing him gaze at their children's drawings with tears he didn't bother to hide, she felt something shift. Maybe he could love them. Maybe he could love again. For the first time in years, Amara's hand brushed his, not clinical, not accidental. Simply human. And Dominic didn't let go. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Full of everything they hadn't said, everything they still feared, and everything that was slowly, impossibly being reborn. The hospital had a strange rhythm at night. Hushed footsteps in the hallway, the distant beep of monitors, the occasional murmur of nurses exchanging updates. In that stillness, the world seemed to shrink, leaving only the patient and the person who dared to stay beside him. Amara had finished her rounds, but she lingered. Something about leaving felt impossible tonight. Dominic sat propped against his pillows, the sketchbook still on his lap. He looked different in this light, less like the impenetrable tycoon, more like a man rediscovering the edges of his own soul. "You stayed," he said softly. "I do that for patients who try to sneak out of bed to prove they're invincible." She gave him a pointed look. His lips quirked. "Caught me. I was plotting a great escape." Amara shook her head, laughing despite herself. "You'd make it 2 steps before collapsing. You've always been stubborn. Some things never change. And some things do," he countered gently, his eyes locking on hers. The words lingered between them, heavy and fragile at once. Later, when the nurses dimmed the lights, Amara sat in the chair beside his bed. Neither spoke for a long while. Instead, they listened, to the quiet, to their own hearts, to the ghosts of years they had lost. It was Dominic who broke the silence. "Do they laugh like you?" The question caught her off guard. "Yes," she whispered. "And sometimes they look at me with your eyes. Serious. Sharp. Like they're already figuring out the world." Dominic exhaled shakily. "I wish I could have been there." Amara turned to him, the truth spilling past her defenses. "So do I." The admission hung in the room like a fragile flame. For the first time in years, they laughed together, really laughed. It was over something small, Dominic fumbling with the hospital tray, nearly spilling his soup, grumbling under his breath while Amara teased him. But it felt like more than a moment. It felt like a memory in the making. And in that laughter, something dangerous flickered, hope. When she finally rose to leave, Dominic's voice stopped her at the door. "Amara?" She turned. His eyes held hers, unflinching. "Thank you for not giving up on me. Even when I gave up on us." Her throat tightened. She wanted to tell him she hadn't forgiven him, not yet. But what came out instead was the quiet truth. "I never stopped caring." Then she slipped into the hallway, her pulse racing, her heart torn wide open. That night, Dominic dreamed, not of boardrooms or mergers, but of a family he had never held, a love he thought was lost, and the terrifying possibility that it might not be too late. But life has a way of breaking what feels too close to healing. The storm was already on its way. The morning light slipped through the blinds of Dominic's hospital room, sharp and unforgiving. The night before had left a fragile thread between him and Amara, thin, delicate, almost beautiful. But dawn has a way of exposing cracks the night tries to hide. Amara entered quietly, carrying his charts. She looked calmer than she felt. Something in her chest still burned from his words. "Thank you for not giving up on me." It had been years since Dominic had spoken to her with that kind of naked sincerity. But the fragile warmth evaporated the moment she stepped in and found Claudia, Dominic's younger sister, standing at his bedside. Claudia's eyes narrowed at Amara, hostility radiating from her. "You," Claudia hissed. "I should have known." Amara froze. "Claudia, you left him. You abandoned this family. And now you think you can just walk back in, playing the savior?" Claudia's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Claudia, stop," Dominic warned. But Claudia was relentless. She turned on Amara, her words sharp with venom. "Do you know what he went through after you left? Do you even care? He was broken. And all because you couldn't give him what he needed most." The air in the room shattered. Amara's grip tightened on the chart until her knuckles whitened. "Don't you dare," she said through clenched teeth. Claudia's voice dripped poison. "It's the truth. You couldn't give him children. You weren't enough. And you never will be." The silence that followed was deafening. Dominic's chest rose and fell rapidly, his jaw clenched. But the damage was done. The unspoken wound that had haunted both him and Amara for years had been dragged into the harsh light of day. Amara's heart slammed against her ribs. She turned her gaze on Dominic, her eyes searching, pleading, for him to say something, anything, to defend her. But Dominic hesitated. Just for a second. And that hesitation cut deeper than Claudia's words ever could. Amara's voice trembled with fury. "So that's what you told her? That I was barren? That I was the reason we fell apart?" Dominic reached for her, his eyes wide. "No, Amara, that's not what." But she stepped back, tears threatening to spill. "You let her think I was broken. You let everyone think it. Amara, please." Her voice cracked. "Do you know what it was like carrying that shame? Walking away from you, because I thought I was the reason your dreams were crumbling? And now, after all these years, you still let that be my story?" Dominic's throat tightened, words failing him. And in that silence, Amara's heart broke all over again. She dropped the chart onto the counter with a harsh thud. "You don't need me to save you, Dominic. You never did. You just needed someone to blame." Then, without another word, she turned and walked out. Dominic reached after her, his voice raw. "Amara!" But she didn't look back. And in that moment, Dominic felt the floor drop beneath him. The bond they had begun to rebuild, shattered, as though it had never been real at all. Amara stormed down the corridor, her heels clicking against the polished hospital floor, each step a thunderclap of betrayal. Her chest ached, her throat burned, but she refused to let herself cry. Not here, not in front of the people who had whispered about her for years. Dominic didn't let her go. Despite his weakened state, he pushed himself out of the bed, ignoring the four tugging at his arm, and staggered after her. "Amara, please wait." She spun around so fast he nearly collided into her. Her eyes, those eyes that once softened for him, were now blades of fury. "Don't you dare," she snapped. "Don't you dare say my name like it means something to you." Dominic's breathing was ragged. He was in pain, physically and emotionally, but his desperation outweighed his pride. "It does mean something. It always has." Her laugh was bitter, a sound he had never heard from her before. "Don't lie to me. You let them tear me apart. You let them call me barren, defective, worthless, and you said nothing. Not then and not now." His chest tightened. "I didn't know how." "Don't you dare," she cut in, her voice trembling now. "Don't you dare say you didn't know how. You were a man who built an empire from nothing, Dominic. You fought boardrooms full of people twice your age, clawed your way to the top, but you couldn't open your mouth to defend your wife." He flinched. Her words hit harder than Claudia's venom. "I thought walking away would free you," Amara continued, her voice cracking under the weight of years. "I thought I was the anchor dragging you down. I wanted you to be happy, even if it wasn't with me. But the truth? You were glad to let me go. Because then you didn't have to face what we really lost." Dominic's throat worked, but his voice was low when he spoke. "We both lost, Amara. You think I didn't suffer? You think I didn't die a little every time I saw a father holding his child, knowing it wasn't us? I blamed myself every single day." She stared at him, her heart twisting, but the anger was stronger. "Then why let me carry it alone?" His hands shook. "Because I was a coward. Because it was easier to let silence eat us than admit I was broken too." The hallway went still. For a moment, both of them stood there, two people bleeding from wounds invisible to the world. Then Amara whispered, "You don't get to say that now. Not after years of letting me drown while you stood on the shore." She turned to leave again, but his voice stopped her. "Amara, if you hated me this much, why did you come back?" Her body went rigid. Slowly, she turned back, eyes burning with unshed tears. And then the words slipped out, before she could stop them. "Because I never stopped loving you, Dominic. And that's the cruelest thing of all." The hallway fell into silence. Dominic staggered back as though her confession had physically struck him. His chest heaved, torn between relief and agony, but before he could speak, Amara turned and walked away, her shoulders trembling. This time he didn't follow. Because for the first time in his life, Dominic Cole realized he had no right to. And in the wreckage of that moment, both of them sank lower than they had ever been before. The house was quiet that night. Too quiet. Amara sat at the edge of her bed, still wearing her hospital scrubs, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles were white. The echoes of their fight rang in her ears, replaying in merciless loops, his silence, her accusations, the words she never meant to say, but had carried inside her for years. She buried her face in her hands and let herself sob, silently, her body shaking with the kind of grief that left scars. For years, she had imagined facing Dominic again. She thought she'd be strong, composed, untouchable. Instead, one night with him had ripped her open all over again. And now he knew. He knew she had never stopped loving him. Across town, Dominic sat in his penthouse study, staring out at the city skyline that had once been his pride. But now, every light twinkling in the distance mocked him, reminding him of everything he had built on a foundation of emptiness. His hand rested over the bandage near his hip, where her surgical work had saved him. The irony stung. The woman he'd abandoned had literally held his life in her hands. And instead of thanking her, instead of falling on his knees and begging for forgiveness, he'd let his pride twist the moment into another wound. "Because I never stopped loving you, Dominic." Her words clung to him like a ghost. For the first time in years, he felt small. Not the titan of boardrooms, not the untouchable CEO, but a man who had lost everything that mattered. In another room, a framed photograph of Claudia sat on the mantel, left behind after the divorce. Dominic picked it up, staring at her carefully posed smile, and for the first time he felt nothing but regret. He hurled the frame into the trash. His mind drifted, unbidden, to the twins. The children Amara had hidden from him. Were they his? Did she hide them because she hated him? Or because she feared what he would do? He pressed a trembling hand over his face. He couldn't stop imagining what they looked like. Did they have her eyes? His stubborn jaw? Did they know who he was? For Amara, the night dragged. She tried to sleep, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw Dominic's face, the flicker of guilt, the tremor in his voice when he admitted he was a coward. She wanted to hate him, but her heart betrayed her. In the stillness, she whispered into the darkness, "Why wasn't love enough for us?" But no answer came. The separation was complete. Both of them, alone in their respective silences, convinced that this chasm between them, was final. And yet, In the brokenness of that night, the question lingered in both their souls. Is it really over? Or is love stubborn enough to survive even this? The morning light did not feel like mercy. It pierced through the curtains of Amara's small townhouse, casting pale streaks across her tear-stained face. She hadn't slept. She hadn't even tried. Her eyes were swollen, her throat raw from sobbing in silence. Still, she forced herself to move, to stand, to prepare for the day, because if she stopped, if she gave herself even one more minute to collapse, she feared she might never get up again. The kettle hissed softly in the kitchen. The sound felt distant, almost unreal. She poured herself tea, though she had no appetite for it, her hands trembling as she held the cup. Every detail of their fight clawed at her mind. The way his jaw had tightened. The way her voice had cracked when she finally admitted the truth. The unbearable silence after. I never stopped loving you, Dominic. She had said it. After all these years of carefully constructed walls, after years of pretending she was fine, she had given him the one truth that could break her. And he had just stood there. She had expected anger, denial, even cruelty. But his silence, his refusal to speak, to move, had been worse. It was rejection without words. Amara pressed the cup to her lips, though she couldn't taste the tea. Her gaze drifted to the hallway, where two small backpacks hung on hooks. One was covered in cartoon rockets, the other in pastel flowers. The twins. Her secret. Her shame. Her greatest joy. She thought of their faces the night before when they peeked into her room, sensing something was wrong. She had forced a smile for them, tucking them back into bed with whispered reassurances. She didn't believe herself. How could she ever tell them the truth now? That their father was alive, near, and that he had once loved her enough to break her heart? Her stomach twisted painfully. She told herself she had done the right thing hiding them. That Dominic's pride, his obsession with legacy, would have destroyed them all. But part of her still ached, still wondered. Would he have been different if he had known? She shook her head, angry at herself. No, she whispered to the empty kitchen. He chose his empire. He chose his pride. Not me. Not them. But the conviction didn't last long. Deep down, she knew the truth was not so simple. Across the city, Dominic sat in his study, still in the same chair where he had collapsed the night before. The city stretched wide beneath him, alive with morning rush hour, but he barely saw it. He hadn't touched his phone, hadn't eaten, hadn't showered. The man who once prided himself on discipline and control was now hollow, emptied by his own cowardice. He replayed every moment with Amara, her trembling voice, the fire in her eyes, the confession that had torn through his defenses like a blade. He had wanted to respond. God, how he had wanted to. His throat had burned with words he couldn't seem to release. I love you too. I never stopped. I was afraid. But his pride, the same pride that had destroyed their marriage, had gagged him again. And now it was too late. He leaned forward, pressing his palms to his eyes, his chest tightening painfully. His father's voice echoed in his memory, stern and cold. A man who cannot produce heirs is no man at all. Legacy is everything. It had been that voice guiding him years ago, whispering that Amara's worth was tied to what she could give him. It had been that voice that pushed him into the cruelest decision of his life. And now, it was that voice that kept him silent when all he wanted was to fall at her feet. He stood suddenly, pacing the length of the room, his fists clenching and unclenching. His thoughts turned to the twins. Children. Her twins. Were they his? The possibility gnawed at him until he couldn't breathe. If they were his, then he had abandoned not just her, but them. His blood. His children. He gripped the edge of his desk so tightly that his knuckles whitened. For the first time in years, he felt fear, not of losing his empire, but of facing the consequences of his choices. What if she never forgave him? What if those children grew up never knowing their father? He sat heavily in the chair, staring at the phone on his desk. One call. That was all it would take. One call to beg for a meeting. One call to say what he should have said years ago. But his hand hovered over the phone, trembling. What if she hangs up? What if she hates me beyond repair? What if it's too late? The silence in the room pressed in on him like a weight. He had commanded boardrooms, bent rivals to his will, but he had never felt smaller than he did in that moment. Finally, with a strangled curse, he shoved the phone away. He couldn't do it. Not yet. But he also knew this. If he didn't reach for her soon, he might lose her forever. Meanwhile, Amara sat at her dining table, scrolling absently through emails she couldn't focus on. Her phone buzzed with a notification, a new message. Her heart jumped before she even checked. But it wasn't him. It was her best friend, Naomi, checking in. How are you holding up? Do you want me to come over? Amara's thumb hovered over the keyboard. She wanted to type, "No, I'm not okay." I saw him. It destroyed me. But she typed back, "I'm fine. Don't worry. Fine." She hated the word. Fine was what people said when they were drowning, but didn't want anyone to see. She set the phone aside, her hands shaking. And then, unbidden, an image of Dominic filled her mind. Not the cold CEO, not the arrogant man she had divorced, but the boy she had once loved, the one who had held her hand under the stars and whispered dreams of forever. She pressed her palms to her eyes, as if she could scrub the memory away. "Stop it," she whispered. "Stop loving him. He doesn't deserve it." But love didn't listen. Love was stubborn. Love was cruel. And no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't kill the hope that maybe, just maybe, he still loved her too. The city moved on as if nothing had happened. Cars flowed through the streets, people bustled to work, and laughter spilled from cafe terraces. But for Dominic, the world had narrowed to one truth. He could no longer live in silence. He had sat in his study for hours, replaying Amara's face in his mind. The fire, the hurt, the confession that had ripped him apart. Every time he thought of her words, guilt gnawed deeper. His hand hovered over his phone again. The contact name glared back at him. Amara. He had never deleted it, even after the divorce. For years, it had been a ghost haunting his call list. He clenched his jaw. He was a man who made billion-dollar decisions with one phone call. And yet, dialing this one number felt impossible. Finally, with a shaky breath, he pressed it. The phone rang once. Twice. His pulse thundered in his ears. And then, her voicemail. "Hi, this is Dr. Amara James. I can't take your call right now. Leave a message." The tone beeped. Silence. Dominic's throat closed. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. All the things he wanted to say, "I'm sorry. I was wrong. I love you. Please forgive me." Jammed together in his chest like a logjam of regret. And then the voicemail cut him off. The line went dead. He cursed under his breath, slamming the phone onto the desk. He had failed again. But before despair could crush him completely, he stood. If he couldn't speak the words over the phone, he would find the courage to face her in person. At that same moment, Amara was in the hospital, her hands busy with charts and rounds, but her mind was far away. Every patient's face blurred into another. Every word from her colleagues drifted past her ears unheard. Her heart was still at war. She had tried to convince herself it was over, that she was free, that she didn't need Dominic anymore. And yet, when her phone buzzed in her pocket, her heart leapt before she even checked it. A missed call. From him. Her breath caught in her throat. She stared at the screen, her pulse racing. He had called. After everything, after the silence, after the years of pain, he had reached for her. But he hadn't left a message. Why? Did he change his mind? Did he regret calling at all? Amara's fingers trembled as she held the phone. Part of her wanted to call back, to demand answers, to scream out all the hurt she had buried. But another part, the smaller, more fragile part, still feared rejection. What if she called and he said the wrong thing? What if this was just another wound waiting to happen? She shoved the phone into her coat pocket, blinking back tears. She needed to focus. She had patience. She had children waiting at home. She couldn't afford to unravel in the middle of a hospital corridor. But her heart whispered traitorously, he called. He still cares. That evening, Dominic stood outside her townhouse, his hand raised to knock, but frozen in midair. He had told himself he just needed to see her. To look into her eyes one more time, and tell her the words he should have said years ago. But now, standing on her doorstep, fear gripped him tighter than ever. What if she slammed the door in his face? What if she had already moved on? Behind the door, faint laughter rang out, a child's laughter. 2 children. Dominic's breath hitched. He staggered back a step, his heart pounding. He had suspected. He had wondered. But hearing the voices made it real. Twins. They were his. They had to be. The sound of their laughter, innocent, bright, untainted by his mistakes, pierced through every layer of pride he had ever worn. For the first time, Dominic felt tears burn his eyes. He turned and walked away, unable to knock, unable to face the truth. Not yet. But deep in his chest, a decision was forming. He couldn't run forever. Inside the house, Amara tucked the twins into bed, kissing their foreheads as she whispered goodnight. She lingered in the doorway, watching them breathe softly in sleep. Her phone buzzed again. Another missed call. Her hand shook as she picked it up. Dominic. Again. Her throat tightened. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Not yet. But as she set the phone down, her eyes closed, and for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine the impossible. What it would mean if he truly wanted them back. Not just her, but them. A family. The thought scared her, but it also lit a flicker of hope she couldn't extinguish. The night was restless. Rain tapped against the windows like hesitant fingers, echoing the turmoil brewing in two hearts miles apart. Dominic sat in his car, parked just a block from Amara's townhouse. He hadn't been able to drive away completely. His chest burned with unspoken words, his jaw tight with the weight of years lost. On the seat beside him lay a folded photograph, one he had kept tucked away even when he had sworn he hated her. It was from their wedding day. She had been radiant, her eyes lit with the kind of joy he hadn't seen since. He looked younger, lighter, a man who hadn't yet ruined everything. He ran his thumb across her face in the picture. His voice cracked in the darkness. I can't lose her again. Not now. Not ever. For the first time in his life, Dominic prayed, not for money, not for power, but for courage. Inside her home, Amara sat curled on the sofa, her robe wrapped around her shoulders. The twins were asleep upstairs. The silence pressed on her like a question that wouldn't let go. Her phone lay on the coffee table, the screen lit with the 2 missed calls that had burned themselves into her mind. She stared at them, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Why now? Why after all this time? She could still remember the day he left her, the coldness in his voice, the way he had walked away without a second glance. That wound had taken years to scar over, and now, with 2 calls, it threatened to tear open again. Her heart screamed for her to answer him, to give him one last chance to explain, to show her that she hadn't been crazy to love him all those years ago. But fear whispered louder, he'll hurt you again. He always does. And yet, she couldn't ignore the pull. She whispered into the empty room. What do I want more? Safety or him? Dominic's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. He couldn't sit there forever. He had built empires with bold moves. This would have to be no different. He started the engine, but instead of driving away, he pulled forward until he stopped in front of her townhouse. The porch light glowed faintly against the rain. His hand trembled as he killed the engine and stepped out, the photograph still clutched in his hand. Every raindrop soaked his suit, but he didn't care. He walked up to her door and knocked, once, twice, 3 times. Firm, but not demanding. A man stripped of arrogance. A man asking for mercy. Inside, Amara froze at the sound. Her heart leapt into her throat. She knew that knock. Even after years, she knew it. She rose slowly, her bare feet soundless on the wooden floor as she approached the door. Her hand hovered over the handle, trembling. Her mind raced with every possible outcome. If she opened it, everything could change. For better or for worse. She closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and whispered to herself, "This is it. This is the choice." Her hand gripped the handle. She opened the door. And there he was, soaked in rain, clutching a weathered photograph, his eyes no longer hard with pride but soft with desperation. For a long, agonizing heartbeat, neither spoke. The air between them was thick with all the words they hadn't said, all the years they had lost. Finally, Dominic's voice broke the silence, low and unsteady. "Amara, I don't deserve it, but please, give me a chance to make it right." Her breath caught. Her heart trembled. The weight of her decision pressed down on her chest. Would she let him in, or close the door forever? The storm outside raged, waiting for her answer. For a long moment, Amara couldn't breathe. Her hand clutched the edge of the doorframe, her knuckles white, her entire body torn between slamming the door shut and collapsing into his arms. Dominic stood there, rain dripping from his dark hair, his suit plastered to his skin, yet he looked nothing like the untouchable CEO the world knew. His eyes were raw, unguarded, pleading in a way she had never seen before. The photograph in his hand trembled as he held it up to her. "Our wedding day," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rain. "I never stopped caring, even when I told myself I hated you, even when I pretended you meant nothing." Amara's lips parted, but no words came. Her heart ached at the sight of it, the 2 of them frozen in a moment of joy that had long since been buried under betrayal. Her voice shook as she finally spoke. "Why now, Dominic? After everything you did to me, why now?" He stepped closer, the photograph shaking in his hand. "Because I've been a coward," he said, the admission breaking something in him. "I let pride and anger blind me. I hurt you in the cruelest way, Amara, and I've lived every day since in regret. When I saw you again, when I saw what I'd thrown away," his voice cracked, his chest heaving. "I can't let you slip away again." Amara's throat tightened. His words pierced through every defense she had built. She wanted to believe him, but the scars ran deep. Her eyes burned with tears. Do you have any idea what your rejection did to me? You didn't just leave me, you destroyed me. You made me believe I was worthless. Dominic's face crumpled. He dropped the photograph, letting it sink into the puddle forming on the porch. His hand reached for hers, trembling. I know. And if I could take it all back, I would. But I can't. All I can do is beg you to let me try again. To prove that I can love you the way I should have from the beginning. Amara pulled her hand back, her chest heaving with silent sobs. She turned away, clutching her arms around herself. You don't know what you're asking, Dominic, she whispered. If I let you in, you're not the only one you'll be facing. His brows furrowed. What do you mean? Amara turned, her eyes glistening. For the first time, she let the secret tremble on her lips. You'll be facing them too. Dominic's breath caught. Confusion flickered across his face. Them? Amara swallowed hard, her heart racing. The truth, buried for years, trembled on the edge of revelation. Yes, she said, her voice low but firm. Your children. Dominic staggered back a step, the world tilting beneath him. His chest tightened, his lips parting in shock. My what? He whispered, disbelief and hope warring in his eyes. Amara's tears spilled freely now. Twins, Dominic. Our twins. The storm outside raged louder, but it was nothing compared to the storm inside his chest. For the first time in his life, Dominic Jameson felt the ground shatter beneath his feet. Not from power, not from loss, but from love, raw and undeniable. The silence that followed Amara's words was unbearable. The storm outside seemed to still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Dominic stared at her, his face pale, his lips trembling around a word he couldn't yet form. His eyes darted back and forth as though searching her face for any sign of a lie, for some cruel joke fate was playing on him. But all he found was the truth. His knees gave way, and he sank onto the porch, his hands clutching his head. Twins, he whispered hoarsely. Mine. Amara's voice was low, but steady, trembling with both fear and defiance. Ours. A boy and a girl. Dominic pressed his palm against his chest, as though to keep his heart from shattering apart. He looked up at her with tears in his eyes, tears Amara had never thought she'd see from him. How could you not tell me? His voice broke, filled with anguish, not accusation. Amara hugged her arms tighter around herself, her voice shaking. Because you destroyed me, Dominic. You made me believe I wasn't enough, less than a woman. You left me broken. And when I found out I was pregnant, I couldn't let you back in. I couldn't trust you with them. Not when you had crushed me so easily. Her words were knives, but they were also true. Dominic lowered his head into his hands. His entire body shook, not from the rain soaking through him, but from the tidal wave of grief and guilt. I missed their first cries, he choked out. Their first steps. Their first words. God, Amara, I missed it all. Amara's eyes burned as she watched him crumble, but she did not move. Part of her longed to comfort him, to tell him he still had time. But another part, the part still scarred, needed to see what he would do next. Dominic lifted his head again, his face streaked with rain and tears. His eyes, raw and desperate, locked on hers. Please, please, Amara. Tell me about them. I need to know everything. Their names. Their laughter. Their fears. I don't care how much it hurts me to realize I wasn't there. I need to know my children. His voice cracked on the word my. Amara's lips trembled. She had imagined this moment countless times in her head, rehearsed his possible reactions, anger, denial, rejection. But never this. Never Dominic Jameson, the man who once built walls taller than empires, falling to his knees and begging for crumbs of his children's lives. Her voice softened, tears rolling down her cheeks. Their names are Aiden and Aria. They're 6 years old. Aiden has your stubbornness, and Aria, she has your smile. Dominic's chest rose and fell in a ragged sob. He pressed his hands to his face, then let them fall, gazing at her as if seeing her for the first time. I don't deserve them, he whispered, but I want to. God, Amara, I wanna. Her heart twisted. She saw the truth in his eyes. Not the cold man who had once discarded her, but a man stripped of his pride, desperate for a second chance. Still, she tested him, her voice hardening through her tears. And what if they hate you? What if they look at you and see the man who abandoned them before they even knew your name? Dominic shook his head, his voice trembling but resolute. Then I'll spend every day proving to them, and to you, that I am not the same man I was. I can't erase the past, but I can fight for the future. If you let me. The storm thundered above them, but in the silence that followed, it was Amara's heart that thundered louder. For the first time in years, she saw not just Dominic the CEO, or Dominic the betrayer, but Dominic, the man who was willing to lose everything if it meant earning just a piece of her forgiveness. The following morning dawned softer than expected. The storm had passed, leaving the sky washed clean, the air fresh with the scent of wet earth and rebirth. Amara hadn't slept much. She'd sat at the edge of her bed, staring at the floor, hearing Dominic's voice echo again and again, his plea, his tears, his vow to try. She had guarded her heart for years, built walls so thick even her own hope struggled to breathe inside them. And yet, the image of Dominic on his knees in the rain, begging not for her forgiveness but for the chance to know his children, was etched into her soul. She knew what she had to do. The twins were in the kitchen, giggling as they built towers of cereal boxes. Aiden wore a mischievous grin, while Arya carefully stacked hers with meticulous precision. Amara stood in the doorway, watching them for a long moment, her chest swelling with love and fear. "Aiden, Arya," she called gently. They looked up, their bright eyes curious. "There's someone I want you to meet." Their faces lit with excitement. "A new friend?" Arya asked. Amara's throat tightened. "Not just a friend. Someone very important." The front door creaked open, and Dominic stepped inside, hesitant, his powerful frame somehow smaller beneath the weight of the moment. He held no briefcase, no armor of wealth or pride, just a trembling hope in his eyes. The twins stared at him. Arya tilted her head. "Mama, who is he?" Amara's heart pounded. She glanced at Dominic, then back at her children. Her voice quivered, but held steady. "This is your father." The room froze. Aiden blinked, his brow furrowing. Arya's mouth dropped open in a small, "Oh." Dominic swallowed hard, kneeling to their level, his voice breaking. "I am so sorry I wasn't here before. But if you'll let me, I'd like to be here now." For a long heartbeat, neither child moved. Then Arya stepped forward. She studied him with wide, searching eyes, the same eyes that mirrored his own. Slowly, she reached out and touched his hand. "Are you going to stay?" she asked softly. Dominic's tears spilled freely. "For as long as you'll have me. Forever, if you'll let me." Aiden crossed his arms, skeptical. "Do you like soccer? Because I'm not teaching you if you don't know how to play." Despite the tears streaming down his face, Dominic let out a shaky laugh. "I'll learn. I'll do whatever it takes." Amara pressed her hand to her mouth, unable to hold back her sobs. The sight of Dominic, once the man who shattered her, now kneeling before their children, stripped of ego, begging for love instead of power, was almost too much to bear. The twins inched closer, wrapping their small arms around his neck. Dominic's body shook as he clutched them both, his tears falling into their hair. "I love you," he whispered fiercely. "I've always loved you, even before I knew you existed." And for the first time in years, Amara allowed herself to believe it. Later, the four of them sat together on the porch as the sun broke through the clouds. The world felt new, as though granting them a second chance. Dominic reached for Amara's hand, his grip tentative, reverent. "I can't undo the past, Amara. But I promise you, there will never be a day again where you doubt how much you mean to me. How much our family means to me." She searched his face, seeing both the man who had broken her and the man who had been remade by loss and love. And for the first time in a long time, she let her heart soften. "We'll take it one step at a time," she whispered. Dominic squeezed her hand, his eyes shining with gratitude. And as Aiden laughed and Arya leaned against her father's arm, Amara knew. The story wasn't ending here. It was only just beginning. The millionaire who once threw away love had been humbled. The barren woman he abandoned had become the mother of his children and the surgeon who saved him. And now, together, they had been given what neither had expected, love at last and a family whole.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting and even more intriguing than you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.